by the power of, not Grayskull. Hi, I'm Lucifer Leghorn, coming back at you with another video. If you've watched my channel before, you will know that this is not going to be a normal video of mine. For those of you who have not watched my channel before, as you can see, this is not going to be a normal video for me to do either. Hi, my name is Lucifer Leghorn. I'm a Satanic priest and I run the Satanic Thulian Society. I also do a lot of YouTube videos talking about Satanism and various satanic things. But this time around, as you can tell from the Jurassic Park shirt, I have a little bit of a nerd side and I'm going to be unleashing it today. And yes, this is actually very sharp, so I'm going to put it down. Alright, so today's video is going to be talking about Keven Smith's Masters of the Universe Revelation. Now, I've tried to do this video several times before, but I've been having some camera problems with storage and everything, so I just fixed it and yeah. Fourth time is a charm, I think. Or is this the fifth time? I don't know how many takes I've done for this video now, but we are going to get it done this time around. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to talk about is I have been a long time He-Man, Masters of the Universe fan since I was a little kid. I grew up in the 80s watching He-Man, watching She-Ra, and having the toys, loving the Dolph Lundgren movie. You know, I've been a He-Man fan since I was just a kid. You know, just as long as I've been a Doctor Who fan, Star Trek fan, and a Star Wars fan. Would I call myself a super fan? No. I wouldn't be calling myself a super nerd, super geek fan, but I do love these shows. I remember them from my childhood, and they mean a lot to me. I just recently watched the newly released Netflix Masters of the Universe Revelation show. Now, I am aware of all the misgivings that people have been giving this show over the past few months, considering on how much Keven Smith has lied about this show and lied about how he was approaching it. Certainly, I am going to side with the fans where Keven Smith is concerned. I've never been a super big supporter of him. I know that he has some really great talent, some really great visionary stuff, but overall, in this situation, I'm going to say he's getting what he deserves for lying about his history with this franchise, for lying about how he was taking the show, and lying very stupidly. Now, I've watched Masters of the Universe Revelation. I've seen the reviews. I've seen other YouTubers just railing on this show. I've seen the reviews tanking from how most people are watching it, and certainly there is some issues with the show that I'm going to address really quickly. Mostly because these are issues that Keven Smith lied about, and it shows his naivety about the franchise and all the different elements to it. He didn't think things through as much as he thought he did, and it shows. And this is what I'm going to talk about. But I'm going to say that contrary to everybody else, I thought that the show was actually not half bad and definitely well worth a watch. Is there issues with it? Do I have problems with it? Yes, I do. Some of these are very glaring issues and glaring problems that I feel should be addressed. And, you know, if they were possible to go back and correct some of these things that are issues, go for it. But if not possible, just sort of run with it. The first big problem that I have with this is unnecessary race swapping. I can understand where they're going. They're trying to include other races, other cultures into the franchise. And it makes sense, given our modern history. Back in the 80s, when this show was originally put out, the TV show was put out to promote the toy line. And, you know, they didn't really have much in the way of other races. They didn't have black characters. They didn't really have too much in the way of Asian characters. It was all white people. So, in our modern times, in the 2020s and whatnot, especially with woke culture going around right now, which is absolutely redonkulous in my opinion, I can understand where they want to bring in a racially diverse cast. And it makes sense to me, that's fine. But when you start taking key characters from the original show or the history of the franchise's universe and then needlessly race swapping them for no real good reason with no real good explanation other than the fact that you can, that doesn't really go over too well with me. And there's two characters, especially the one character, which I have a problem with them race swapping. The other character, I'm not too familiar with this character. She becomes a more involved character in this show, and they race swapped her from being a white chick to a black chick. And the race swapping in Masters of the Universe Revelation does nothing to move the story forward. I understand race swapping certain characters, especially in live action franchises, where the character could be portrayed better by a person of another race. And one of the greatest examples of this is Nick Fury in the MCU, portrayed by Sam Jackson, versus the original live action Nick Fury and the comic book character, who is always a white guy, and in the original Nick Fury movie was played by David Hasselhoff. They swapped it over to Sam Jackson for the MCU, the modern MCU, and he has done a fabulous job of playing Nick Fury. And I have no problem with that. I think he did a really good job with the character, with the role. But when you come to Masters of the Universe, the first character that you see that is definitely race swapped, that I noticed was race swapped, was the one character who's Tila's best friend, who in the original show was a white chick, was a really small, minor character. She really had no real impact over the greater storylines. And they brought her into this show as a much greater character. She's apparently a slightly different character than the original one, which is fine because she didn't experience all the adventures that Tila did, and she's always fascinated by the adventures that Tila has had. And they race swapped her from being a white chick to a black chick needlessly. It really doesn't do anything for the character, it doesn't move the character forward, it doesn't change who the character is. The other one, this is the bigger one that I have a problem with, is Lord Greyskull. Now, Lord Greyskull, if you're a fan of Masters of the Universe, is the ancestor of He-Man. He is the biological ancestor of He-Man, and he is the first, he's the first He-Man. And it's interesting because He-Man is this blonde-haired, blue-eyed, big buff dude. I mean, he's a white dude. And in all the franchise lore and all the Eternian history, Lord Greyskull was, of course, a blonde, buff, white dude. It made sense. They wanted him to look like He-Man and everything else, but in Revelations, they race swapped him from being a blonde, white dude who's big and buff to a big buff, black dude with dreadlocks. And it does nothing for the character. They didn't change who the character was. They didn't change how he approached things. He was still the same guy, still acted the same, still behaved the same, still had the same history. It's just they race swapped him. And for no reason. Literally, absolutely no reason than the fact that they could. This is my big problem with the race swapping in the show. It's an animated show, and they go and they unnecessarily race swap two characters. The one character I could actually, the girl who travels with Tila, fine. I really couldn't care less. I didn't know the character very well before. It means nothing to me, but Lord Greyskull is a well-known character for all of the franchise fans, and they know how he is supposed to look, and he doesn't look right. And they did it with no real reason other than the fact that they could do it. And they don't call to the point or point out the fact that he's a black dude and he's suddenly he's the ancestor of Prince Adam and the royal family, and he's the very first He-Man, and he's actually black, they just did it. And he's the same character. They don't call any point to it. And it makes no sense. So it was a really pointless race swap, and that's where I have my problem with that. The next thing that I'm going to point out is the Sword of Power. Now, anybody who understands the history of the franchise, who's watched it, who's been a fan, they're going to catch us and they're going to be like, wait a second, this doesn't make any full sense when you stop and think about it. Because a lot of people seem to be forgetting right now that there isn't actually one Sword of Power. In this show, the Sword of Power is split in two. Warning, a little bit of a spoiler if you haven't seen the show yet. It's split in two in the very first episode. And supposedly, because it's split in two, because a huge explosion happens involving, at the heart of Grayskull, the very power of the universe, all the magic of the universe, and the sword absorbs this explosion to try to save everybody. It's split in two, and part of the storyline is that Teela, not He-Man, and there's a really good reason for it, not He-Man, is trying to reforge the sword, to bring the sword back together, to bring magic back to the universe, because without magic, the universe is actually dying. My big glitch here is that anybody who is a fan of the show will realize that this makes no sense. The reason being is because the Sword of Power, there wasn't just one Sword of Power. There was already two Swords of Power. Two of them. And He-Man's sword, according to the toy lines and everything else, has historically always been intended to split in two, which that makes sense to that. You know, this sword is, part of it goes to the dark side, part of it comes to the light side, and when they're joined together, it forms the power sword that creates He-Man. Historically, in the toy line, He-Man comes with one half of the sword, and Skeletor always came with the other half of the sword, and you kind of had to put them together for one or the other to be wielding both halves of the sword, which would have the Sword of Power. But there's another Sword of Power in the franchise, and it's wielded by, I can't remember if she's Prince Adam's sister or cousin. I want to say that they're actually cousins, but I could be mistaken. She-Ra. She-Ra has the other Sword of Power. Her power sword also derives its power from Grayskull. She was, I think, actually, no, I want to say that she was Prince Adam's sister who was taken and thought dead, and she lives in another dimension, and she was working for Hordak. It's been a really long time since I watched these shows, and yeah, so I'm a little bit rusty on it. Excuse me, I'll be right back really quickly. Sorry, I needed to grab a drink. So, She-Ra lives in another dimension. She is fighting Hordak. And Hordak is technically Skeletor's boss. He's stronger than Skeletor. He has a full army, full legions at his backing. She-Ra has to actually have even more friends, even more people in on her secret or working with her, because she is fighting in a resistance force against the hordes of Hordak. She is already facing a much greater battle than He-Man is. He-Man is just defending the very core of the universe, just the very heart, okay? And he's facing technically a small little force of enemies. Yes, he has the entire backing of the kingdom with him, and he has a greater army at his back, but She-Ra is facing a much larger uphill battle because her force is not so well trained. They're not technically soldiers. These are resistance fighters. And she's up against a much stronger empire of soldiers led by Hordak. So the dichotomy is sort of way against her. She's facing a much greater battle. She also has her own remade Netflix show that is really getting slammed, and honestly, I would agree with that much more than I agree slamming against this. So my problem here is the Sword of Power splits in half, like it's supposed to be able to, according to the toy line, and now Teela has to put it back together. There's a really good reason why He-Man's not putting it back together, and I'm not going to spoil that. Now, moving onward, I'm going to address Teela herself, and this is my biggest problem with this show. The show is a really good show. It tells a really compelling story. It has a really good narrative. But my biggest problem is the main character. I love the fact that Sarah Michelle Gellar came on board to voice Teela. She did a phenomenal job. I am not going to criticize her for her acting ability or her performance. She did great. My critique is actually to the character herself. The Teela portrayed in Revelation, in Masters of the Universe Revelation, is not the Teela from the original show. It does not fit. She has, in the very first episode, at the end of the very first episode, she has a complete and total tweak out, meltdown, chews out everybody around her, her own father, the king and queen, even Cringer the cat, and then storms out of the palace. Yeah. She has a complete and freaking meltdown for no reason. For no actual reason. I know people who are going to be on the liberal side are going to say, oh, she had every reason. He lied to her. Well, she melts down because she finds out that Prince Adam is He-Man. She never knew. And I've always wondered why it was never told to her, but I kind of figured she didn't need to know. It was actually safer for her not to know who He-Man was, especially with her being so close to him. Because in the original show, she and He-Man, as well as she and Adam, both versions of He-Man, had a little bit of smitten with each other. It wasn't ever followed through, but it was always hinted at in a very lighthearted way. And suddenly, she gets angry because she finds out that he's He-Man. I'm just going to spoil that a little bit. She finds out that he's He-Man in the worst way possible. She has a complete meltdown, chews everybody out, relinquishes her rank, relinquishes her position, goes half shaves her head, and it is implied that she's having a lesbian relationship. I say implied because it's never outrightly stated. And it's not even really pertinent to the story because it's only partially made any sort of point about. And you could even possibly say, oh, they're just friends. And that would be completely feasible too. There is very little implication here that Teela could potentially be a lesbian. But later on in the series, it's implied that she's actually more bisexual. And again, this is something that is only being done in passing. My main problem is how Teela acts throughout the entire show. She acts like a spoiled little brat, okay? For the most part. She's still getting the job done. She still goes out and she's still being the hero. But she actually acts like a spoiled little brat in this first episode, right at the very end. And when you next see her in the next episode, she has this stupid, half-shaved head look and doesn't look anything like herself. And it's implied that she and her one friend might be Dicadelic. I'm not trying to be crude or crass here. That's just how it is. And you know what? Who the hell cares? This is Masters of the Universe. This is meant to be family friendly and fun. And there's a little bit of gory scenes. There's some really good scary scenes. And this is all just little nitpicking elements of the show. Now, for those people who, like me, have been dealing with woke culture way too long, I can understand where people are sick and tired of this. And they're going to lash out against all these different elements. There are a few other elements to the show, but I'm not even going to address those because I'm going to state right here. The artwork, the way that the show was approached. My apologies about that. Had to deal with my son really quickly. So, I'm going to backtrack here. I can understand where everybody is getting frustrated with all the woke agenda, where people are recently taking old shows that have huge fan bases, throwing woke agendas, woke politics, and whatnot into these shows for no real good reason and ruining the shows. And I can understand people's frustration with that. I can also understand people getting angry with Keven Smith. He lied. He lied so very much about the production of this show, about what he was doing with it. And he did it to cover his ass because he knew that people were going to backlash if he threw in too much woke stuff. People are backlashing at him anyways. The point is yes, there is woke in it. There is pointless woke in it. It does nothing to move the story along. But the thing is there is actually a story to this show. It's actually there, and it's not terrible. I'm perfectly fine with Tila taking the reins of this show and moving the story forward. It's done in a very smart, clever way. I'm not fine with the needless, pointless, woke agenda moments. The needless, pointless race swapping. The needless, pointless sexuality hints. In the original show, it didn't really matter if people were straight or gay. It wasn't hinted at for the general purposes. Yes, you may have had a few minor romance interests, but there was very little point to it. There was a lot of really good things to this show that I loved. One thing that I always never understood about with the original show was how Adam was supposedly this big wimp, yet he is still this big buff dude, the same size as He-Man, looks identical to He-Man, and no one realizes that he's He-Man. In this show, they corrected that. They made Adam smaller, much smaller. He was a teenaged boy, and he looked like it. He still looked like Adam. He was still Prince Adam. And the actor that they got to play both He-Man and Prince Adam did fabulous jobs. The portrayal of the characters were great. Mark Hamill as Skeletor was amazing. He brought the Joker back in certain scenes. It was the Joker again in Skeletor's body. Tony Todd as Scareglow. Great performance. I love Tony Todd. Sarah Michelle Gellar playing Tila, the main heroine of the story. She did a fantastic job in her performance. I don't like where the character was taken. I don't like how... Sorry. Got cars passing by and... yeah. I don't like how the character was portrayed by the script. I don't like how she was written. But I love the performance of Sarah Michelle Gellar. She took the character, she ran with it, she did a fabulous job. And when Tila was not acting like a totally spoiled little prat, she was an amazing character. All the characters in the show were amazing. Great callbacks to the original characters, great references, great showing. All around, I would give this show a good 3.5 to 4 stars. Not joking. I'm not going to give it a 5-star rating because it definitely doesn't deserve it with all the stupidity that went behind it. With the stupidity of Keven Smith in lying about things. I don't appreciate that. But the show itself, I'm looking forward to a second season. I'm willing to actually deal with the minor woke elements and move forward with them. I would appreciate it if we could go back and remove some of the needless woke elements, redo certain parts of it so it's more in line with the original series like it's supposed to be. But overall, this does nothing to detract from the original franchise, and it is a very interesting move forward with it. Would I change certain things? Yes. If I was running it, I would have definitely changed various character designs. But there's a lot of character designs that is truly from the original show and truly a fantastic addition. So I'm going to wrap it up here. I'm rambled closer to 30 minutes now on this. And this is my takeaway from it. This show is worth watching. The rating reviews that are on Rotten Tomatoes are undeserved. The the criticizing of Keven Smith is well deserved, but the show itself does not deserve quite as low of a score as it's getting. I'm a fan of the original show. I love sitting down with my son watching the original show when I can. I haven't been able to do it very much, but I have watched some older episodes more recently, and so I've refreshed myself quite a bit on it, to the point that I can. I love the original She-Ra show. I love the original Masters of the Universe show. I remember having the toys. This has been a big part of my life growing up all the way now. I'm almost 40 years old. I turn 40 next month. And, to see this being slammed on when there is so much that's in line with the original show and moves it forward in a really interesting way, I'm going to ask people, ease off. Keep on with Keven Smith. The guy deserves it. He deserves everything you give him. But the show itself, ease off. Point out the bad parts to it that need to be addressed. And be like, okay, you guys got this part right, but this part's wrong. And when you compare the two lists, you're going to find that the wrong woke stuff is tiny versus everything that they did right. Until next time, I'm Lucifer Lake Borden. Tell me what you think in the comments down below. Thank you all for bearing with me for almost 30 minutes if you made it to this point. Like, share, subscribe, and check out the links down below in the comment section for stuff about STS, about the books, my books that I have published, as well as my GoFundMe page, help me renovate my house. Thank you all. I appreciate it. Until next time, I'm out of here.